Let's go ahead and take a look how to use shared preferences. We said shared preferences allows us to save small pieces of data. So whenever we want to save small pieces of data in our application, we must, well, we don't have to, but we should use shared preferences because now we have this class provided by Android that allows us to save these pieces of data in a key value pair. All right, so let's go ahead and figure out how to do this real quick here. Well, as you can see, I created a new application or a new project, I should say, and I call this SPrefs for shared preferences. So you can go ahead and create a new application here. And what I want you to do is to add an edit text. There is indeed a text view here, which I got rid of it, or I got rid of the text inside of it. And I have IDs. I said show message text view. I have a button here. It just says button. You can change the name, doesn't matter. But what's important is that it has an ID as well. So you know how to do all of these by now. So I won't bore you going through the whole process of doing that. Okay, very good. So I want you to go ahead and pause this video at this point and go ahead and create this very simple user interface. Edit text. We have a text view that is empty and we have a button. And then I want you to go and in main, go ahead and create all of the instance variables for our buttons, edit text, and text view. Wire everything up, create a on-click listener for our button, and come back once you are done doing that. Okay, go ahead and do that, and I'll see you in a bit. All right, so assuming that you were able to go through and do all the things that I asked you to do, make sure again you have the correct IDs. It doesn't matter if you have the same ID as mine here, as long as your IDs are something that you will remember to connect them in our main activity here, right? Very good. So as we always do, let's go ahead and say private. I'm going to connect my own buttons here. Start with button, and I'm going to name this save button private edit text, that is. And this is going to be enter message. And last but not least, we're going to have a text view. Show message text view. That's quite a long name, but that's totally fine. So let's start with our button here. So save button. Set everything up. Find by ID. Okay. Edit text, let's enter message, find by ID, message edit text, and we have show message text view. There we go. All right, so all is good. And let's go ahead and say save button, set our on-click listener here, set on-click listener, new on-click listener, enter, and voila, we have everything there. So what do we want to do here? So the first thing we're going to do is retrieve our enter message here, our text, right? So I'm going to put that in a string. I'm going to say message. I'm going to invoke our enter message text, edit text, as you can see there. I'm going to get text, and I'm put it to string, and I'm going to invoke the trim. That way it's going to just get rid of all the extra spaces and so forth that users may enter. It's always a good idea to do so. Okay, now that I have our message, so we need to create the shared preference instantiations. That way we're able then to save that data. How do we do that? Well, there is indeed a class called SharedPreferences. There we go. Click enter. Now, shared preferences here, I'm going to go ahead and say SharedPreferences. Okay. Now, because I'm inside of an activity, there's few methods I can just go ahead and invoke. One of which is the get shared preferences as such. Okay, like that. Very good. Now, when we want to create our shared preferences, there's two things we need to pass. The first thing is the name of the entity in which we're going to be saving this data, this message, okay? Let's call it a key to our shared preferences. Remember, shared preferences is just an XML, and as anything, we need to have an ID to it. So usually what we want to do is add some sort of static ID here. So I would say, for instance, all caps, because it's static. I'm going to say message underscore ID, like that. So we haven't created that. We can just click here and create a static message ID. Let's see, constant field. I'm going to make this in my activity. So there is a constant here field, which is indeed a final static. So in this case here, I can just call this messages or messages prefs. So we know it's for preferences. There we go. So we have that. Next thing we need to pass is the mode. So when we save things in our shared preferences, we can actually limit the accessibility from other applications or even within our application, but mostly from other applications. So for mode, we can go ahead and say here, mode private, right? Because I want to make sure that only this application that we're working on is able to access this XML file. We're going to be adding some things into it, little data, okay? Like that. But also you could go ahead and say, for instance, something like context.mode, and that works as well. Okay, but in this case, you can just go ahead and say mode private like that, and that should work. And you can see at the top here, it will import a few things. Okay, so we have that, all is good. So now we have our shared preferences. Now, this is not it. You would think we can just come down here and say shared preferences and .put and start adding things. Well, not quite yet. Now that we have our shared preferences here, we need to invoke the actual shared preferences editor. How do we get the editor? Well, we said shared preferences. Notice we are calling the interface shared preferences. You can see it's an interface because we have an I here. So shared preferences, and I'm going to invoke the editor inside of that interface, another interface there, right? So in this case here, I'm going to just call this editor, okay? And then I'm going to say it's equal. Now I'm going to get our shared preferences variable that we created here of type shared preferences. And then I'm going to be able to invoke the edit method, right? So now we're taking this edit method of shared preferences. We are putting that inside of our editor to say our editor now is going to be able to point to where our shared preferences is, the XML, and only our editor is going to be able to go and probe in and start adding all of the data that we want. So this is our handle here. Very good. And next, once we have that, we can use the editor to start putting things. Now, like I said before, this is just like a hash map, remember, where you can pair things together like the key value pair structure. So here, I'm going to say editor.put. I can put all sort of things. So this is the same structure that you saw way before when we talk about hash maps, although this is now a type of editor, because we said this is a shared preferences interface editor. So I can put boolean, can put float. So there's a lot of methods that are overloaded here. Okay, so I'm going to just put a string at this point here. Now to put a string, obviously, just like in anything, we have to put the key and then the actual value. Well, the key can be anything we want. We can just say message, and then the value is going to be what? Our message that we are passing, which we're getting from enter message text here, the edit text. Now, notice the beauty here is that we have this squiggly yellow line. If you hover over, it says that the edit without a corresponding commit or apply will give us issues pretty much. So this is reminding us that we're not ready yet. Once we have our editor, we are putting something to our editor, but it's not until we actually save or commit to our XML, right? It's not until then that the actual data is going to be saved. That is very important. So think of this as literally the editor that we're using here, this Android Studio. We can put all the code here. It's not until we actually say save, then we're going to be able to run and actually see the difference that we've made. Same thing here. So now I have to come here and say editor dot commit or apply. I like the apply because that seems to be the one Android likes us to use. So, not clear. Apply, folks. There we go. So here we are saving to disk, if you will. Very good. And that's it. Now, how do we retrieve this information? Because that's the whole idea. If we're able to save something, we want to be able to retrieve that back. Well, I'm going to do that outside of our set and click listener. So here I'm going to say get data back from shared preferences. Well, to get data back, we will just go ahead and have to instantiate shared preferences again. I'm going to call this get shared data. I'm going to say is equal to get shared preferences. So here I'll have to pass the mode that we passed before. So in this case, it's going to be private mode like that. Okay. And then I can say get shared preferences that get string, and I'm going to pass the key. In this case, the key we said was what? Message. So I'm going to say the key is going to be message, right? Makes sense. And it requires us to pass some sort of a default value because just in case there is nothing that we have passed in that we have saved, we need to add a default value the users can see. Okay, in this case, I'm going to say nothing yet. Okay, it can be anything. Very good. So at this point here, we are able to get that value. In fact, I can just take all of these values. It's going to be a string. I'm going to say string value to that. Just put it into value. And now I can invoke our text view, show message text view dot set text, and pass the value. Okay. Very good. Now, if I'm going too fast here for you, that means probably you need to go back and rewatch the videos that we did before, because you should be able to follow along without any issues here, okay? Because there's nothing really new here. It's just that I'm going a little bit faster because I assume and I really want you to be up to speed at this point. Okay, but nevertheless, I will not let you fall behind. I will keep explaining things as we learn new things. Okay, so that's how shared preferences works. So let's go ahead and run this, or perhaps maybe go through all of the things that we did here. So we did the very simplistic things, as you can see here. We have save button, enter message. So these are just the widgets we have in our user interface. So nothing new there. And then, of course, what we did here is that we instantiated our shared preferences and make sure to pass the message ID. So each time we create a shared preference, we need to say, okay, what is the ID of this shared preference file? And I said that in Android, all of that, the shared preference is actually saved as an XML file. So we need to give it an ID. So we just pass here a message ID, which is a static final variable that we named messages prefs here. Now, this is customary to do so. That way we don't write like this every time we want to invoke our ID that we passed here, okay? So anytime you have certain things that never really change, we invoke the static final and create that message or that ID or that variable. That way the whole class can actually use it. Okay, very good. So once we do that, of course, we make sure that this is mode private, meaning only this application is going to be able to use and access this shared preference we're about to create. And of course, we invoke the editor because the shared preferences itself, it has to come hand in hand with an editor in order to be able to then start writing things into it. And here we are saying put string. We could have put in Boolean, we could have put any other type, as you saw. And then we pass the name or the key at this point of this key value pair structure that we're creating here, right? We said we want it to be message, and we pass the message, which is indeed what we're getting from the edit text, this, okay? And never forget to say editor.apply, because this means we're now saving the data that we've just saved. Okay, so what we did now here is that to get stuff back, we have to instantiate these shared preferences and call the get preferences and make sure we tell now that the mode is still private, meaning we're still on the same application here. And then I'm going to put inside of a string, I'll go and get the key is message because that's what we said it to be here. And then we have to pass the default value just in case things go wrong or there's nothing inside of our key here. The user will see something that says nothing yet. Okay. So this is a message. You can put whatever you want to put there. And then, of course, we pass this value here into our text view. That's it. So let's go ahead and run this. I can show you exactly how all of this pans out. Once we run this, assuming we made no mistakes. Okay, there it is. There is our beautiful application. Nothing yet, indeed, because it doesn't have anything yet. Okay, so if I go here and say new message, and say save, nothing really happens again. However, if I get out of it and go back and run as prefs, look what's going to happen. Nothing. Why is nothing happen? Let's go give it a run. Make sure when we're getting, we need to pass the same ID, message ID and message ID. Okay, and the keys that we're passing has to be the same as well. Otherwise, we're going to run into issues. Okay, let's run this and see. Voila. There says nothing here. Let's go ahead and say new message. Gonna click button and all should be good, but we don't see anything here. Okay, let's get out of here and clear this and open the app again. And we're gonna say new message there. So whatever we enter here, whatever we enter, hit save, get out of this app entirely. Going back to that app at some other time, we should see the latest thing that we have saved in there. Okay, whatever we enter. Very good. So you can see with this structure here, we're able to save small pieces of data that can enhance our application. You can now starting to see, hopefully, also the fact that if you look at the previous apps that we've built, especially the trivia app, there are things that you can do now. For instance, you can save the score of the user as they play the game. You can save the score to where even if they stop and come back 2, 3 days, or even a year later, as long as the app is still installed, they're gonna come back and see their last score they had when playing that application or that game. In fact, for the next challenge, that's exactly what you're gonna be doing. So what I want you to do is to figure out a way in which, as the user from the trivia game we created, how about make it so that the user can save their score? Can you do that with this knowledge that you have already here? Oh, I'm very sure you can. All right, go ahead and give it a try, and I'll see you next.